You might think the forest is peaceful, that the crackle of a campfire is comforting, that the night is just darkness and stars. But sometimes the woods have their own plans. Sometimes what watches from the trees is patient, deliberate, and very real. Welcome to Minute 60, where we tell stories that are true. Stories that will haunt your thoughts long after you've left the campsite. Before we begin, take a moment and think. Where are you listening from tonight? Type it in the comments, we'd love to know. And ask yourself, have you ever felt eyes watching you while camping? Heard footsteps on a path when no one else was there? Or experienced something in the wild that made you question reality? If so, share your story below. Some of these experiences may appear in future videos. So, turn off the lights, settle in, and listen carefully. These stories are not for the faint of heart. The plan had been simple. One last camping trip before summer disappeared. Just me and 2 friends, backpacks full of supplies, a small tent each, and the kind of excitement only a remote forest can inspire. The forest we chose was tucked away behind miles of unpaved roads, an old national forest trail that most people avoided. Even before arriving, a strange tension wrapped around us, subtle and insistent, like a presence watching from the tree line. We arrived mid-afternoon, the sun low in the sky, brushing the tops of the trees with golden light. The air smelled of damp earth, pine resin, and something I couldn't identify, faint and metallic. We unloaded our backpacks, straining against the weight, and carried them to a clearing we had spotted from the trail. It was perfect, deceptively perfect, the kind of clearing that seemed almost placed by someone else, with a small creek running beside it, stones for a fire pit already scattered across the dirt, and no sign of other humans for miles. The first thing I noticed was the quiet. Not the natural quiet of the forest, which is filled with birds, insects, and the sound of wind through leaves. No, this quiet was heavy, almost deliberate, pressing against my ears and making every small noise, every footstep, exaggerated. I could hear the distant rustle of leaves, a bird call far off, the creek gently babbling. But it was all muted somehow, like the forest itself had swallowed sound. We set up our tents and unpacked our gear, trying to keep the mood light. Jokes were made about bears, ghosts, and local legends. My friends laughed easily, but I noticed the way their eyes darted to the tree line, the way their smiles didn't quite reach their eyes. Something felt off. Shadows stretched long across the clearing, twisting unnaturally as the sun dropped behind the dense trees. I shook my head and blamed nerves, telling myself it was just the anticipation of the night ahead. We spent the rest of the afternoon exploring nearby trails. The deeper we went, the thicker the forest became. Trees pressed close together, their gnarled roots twisting across the dirt like veins. The sunlight filtered down in narrow shafts, leaving the forest floor in a patchwork of light and shadow. We found old fire pits, scorched logs, and traces of human activity long abandoned. Each discovery made my stomach tighten. The forest was old, ancient even, and it carried the weight of everyone who had been here before, and perhaps everything else that had waited. By dusk we returned to the clearing. The creek sparkled in the fading light, and we built a fire, stacking logs carefully. The first night was supposed to be simple: dinner, some stories, then sleep. But as the light dimmed and the shadows stretched across the clearing, I noticed a movement in the trees. A branch snapped, sharp and deliberate. I froze, heart thumping. "Probably a deer," I said, though my voice lacked conviction. My friends laughed and went about their preparations, but I couldn't shake the feeling that eyes were on us. Night came quickly. The sun disappeared entirely, leaving only the soft glow of our fire and the faint silver light of the moon. I zipped myself into my tent early, lying on the thin sleeping pad and listening. The forest was alive with sound now, or perhaps it always had been. But each sound carried a weight, a purpose. Leaves rustled too deliberately. Twigs snapped with intent. My flashlight rested beside me, useless unless I ventured out, which I wasn't brave enough to do. And then I heard it, a snap of a branch, close, deliberate, measured. Footsteps circled the campsite, slow, human-like, not matching any of ours. My pulse spiked. I unzipped the tent flap slightly, peeking out. Nothing. Shadows clung to the edge of vision, and the trees seemed to shift when I looked away, hiding shapes just beyond recognition. I whispered my friends' names. No response. I debated waking them, but fear silenced me. Some part of me understood instinctively, you don't confront something in the dark that is patient, deliberate, and unseen. I gripped my flashlight, shining it in short bursts toward the edge of the clearing. The beam revealed nothing but trees. Yet, in the damp earth near the fire, I saw them. Footprints. Small, humanoid, precise. Circling. Close enough to feel deliberate. Hours crawled by. Every sound was magnified, the creek's water gurgling like a warning, the leaves rustling like whispers, the wind carrying that same metallic scent, curling around the tents like fingers. I couldn't sleep. I kept my eyes on the tree line, imagining shapes darting, moving just out of reach, testing our boundaries. Around 2 a.m. I heard it again, a low, distorted scream from deep within the forest. Human, yet twisted, echoing as though bounced between the trees. My friends stirred, but did not wake. The footsteps resumed, now circling closer, more deliberate. I whispered again, "We know you're there. Leave us alone." The forest responded with silence that was heavier than sound. The rest of the night became a rhythm of tension and waiting. Every crack of a branch, every snap of twigs, every distant call seemed deliberate. Sleep was impossible. The forest breathed around us. It watched. It measured. I felt eyes everywhere. By the first light of dawn, exhaustion won. My friends woke with groggy laughter, unaware of the vigilant presence that had stalked us. The footprints had vanished, leaving the earth untouched, as if nothing had happened. But the memory lingered. We packed in silence. The forest seemed to release us grudgingly, shadows lengthening even in morning light, the metallic scent lingering faintly in the air. The memory of the night, the shapes, the sounds, the deliberate steps around our tents stayed with me as we hiked back toward the trailhead. I realized something important. The forest wasn't just scenery. It remembered. It watched. And it waited for the next visitors. Even now I cannot think of that night without shivering. Every rustle of leaves, every snap of a branch, every shadow cast by moonlight reminds me of the patient, deliberate presence in those woods. Camping is not just about escaping the city. Sometimes the woods are alive in ways you cannot see, and sometimes they never forget. The second night in the forest was heavier, colder, and somehow more alive than the first. Even as the sun set, the shadows stretched unnaturally, weaving between the trees and over the campsite, like they were searching, observing, waiting. My friends tried to keep things light, laughing quietly around the fire, but their glances toward the dark tree line were too quick to be casual. I noticed the tension in the way they moved, the way they shifted from foot to foot, keeping an eye on the edge of the clearing. None of us wanted to admit it out loud. Something had been there the night before, something deliberate, patient, and very aware of us. We tried to distract ourselves, poking at the fire, sipping from water bottles, checking our supplies. The metallic scent from the day before lingered faintly in the air, more pronounced now, curling into our nostrils, and making my stomach tighten. Probably just something in the soil, I told myself, though I didn't believe it. Every instinct screamed that the forest was different tonight, that it remembered our presence, and that whatever was out there was not benign. Around 9:30 p.m. I was sitting just outside my tent, poking at the fire with a stick, trying to focus on its warmth. The forest had fallen into a strange rhythm. The wind no longer just blew, but rustled with intent, moving leaves and branches as if pointing towards something we couldn't see. The creek nearby babbled more urgently, the sound sharper, slicing through the darkness. And then I heard it. A step, careful, precise, coming from the shadows beyond the firelight. I froze. "Did you hear that?" I whispered. My friends shook their heads, pretending they hadn't. I stared into the darkness. There was nothing, yet the sound persisted. Another step, then another, circling, retreating, circling again. My pulse accelerated. These were not animals. These were not the wind. Someone, or something, was moving deliberately around our campsite, just outside the circle of firelight. I considered waking my friends, telling them to leave, but fear froze my voice. I stayed crouched low, trying to remain invisible. I whispered softly into the darkness. "We know you're here. Please leave us alone." The forest held my words without response, heavier than any sound I had heard, stretching them into the trees. Minutes passed like hours. The footsteps continued, shifting closer and farther, never revealing themselves. The firelight threw shadows that bent unnaturally, moving almost independently, flickering across the trees in shapes too long, too thin to be human. My hands shook slightly as I fanned the flames, desperate to hold on to the warmth, desperate to feel safe. But safety had left us the moment the forest noticed our presence. Then came the scream, low, human-like, distorted, echoing between the trees. It didn't come from near the campsite, but far enough to travel, twisted by distance and shadows. It made my stomach knot, my chest tighten, my vision tunnel. My friends sat rigidly, silent, listening, their faces pale in the firelight. None of us could speak. The scream had been long, terrible, and completely unidentifiable. And then silence, so complete it pressed against our ears. The footsteps returned, closer now, deliberate and synchronized, moving around the fire. I held my flashlight steady, catching only glimpses, a flicker, a shadow, a shape too fast to follow. Each movement was deliberate, as if the forest itself had become aware of our fear and was testing us, measuring our reactions. I tried to think rationally. Someone lost? A prank? But the trail leading here was isolated, and there were no roads, no paths, no signs of other humans. The forest was empty except for us. And yet the footsteps, the shadows, the metallic scent, they persisted, deliberate, patient. Hours passed in agonizing stretches of tension. Every snap of a branch, every rustle of leaves, every distant animal call became a signal, a message, a warning. Sleep was impossible. Even lying in my tent, I could feel the forest pressing against the thin fabric, breathing around me, shifting subtly when I moved. The metal tang in the air seemed stronger, clinging to my skin, my hair, making every inhalation taste sharp and wrong. Around 1:30 a.m. I heard a rustle from the tree line, closer than ever. Something moved just beyond the firelight, a shadow too tall, too thin, bending unnaturally, gliding instead of walking. I froze completely, heart hammering. The fire flickered, casting the shadow across the clearing, stretching it impossibly. It lingered, silent, observing. Then just as suddenly it vanished into the darkness, leaving nothing but stillness and my own ragged breathing. My friends stirred, uncomfortable in their tents, shifting in response to some unspoken fear. I wanted to speak, to tell them to stay inside the circle of fire, but the words caught in my throat. Whatever was out there wasn't concerned with names or voices. It was patient, deliberate, calculating. We were intruders, and the forest had remembered. By 3 a.m., the sounds intensified. The footsteps were joined by faint scratching noises, subtle at first, then growing louder, echoing off distant trees. I imagined shapes flitting through the darkness, watching, waiting, circling, disappearing. Every time I thought I caught movement, it was gone, replaced by shadows stretching unnaturally along the ground. My hands gripped the flashlight so tightly I could feel the skin blanching. The metallic scent grew stronger, almost choking in its intensity. I could smell it on my clothes, in my hair, mixing with the scent of pine smoke from the fire. It wrapped around the clearing like a second wind, curling under the tents, swirling around our feet. I shivered violently. My mind raced with every possibility. Animal, human, something older than reason. Then from deeper in the forest came another sound, low, guttural, like a human groan twisted into something unnatural. It moved closer, echoing across the creek, then fading. The silence after it was worse. It pressed against my ears, filled my mind, and left me trembling. My friends didn't wake, but I could see the way their tents shifted, as if they too felt the tension radiating in the air. By dawn, none of us slept. We sat silently around the fire, exhausted, hearts pounding, eyes scanning the tree line for shapes that were no longer there. The footprints that had appeared during the night were gone, leaving no trace, as though erased deliberately. But the memory of them remained, burned into my mind. We packed in silence. The forest seemed to release us grudgingly, shadows shrinking back into the trees, the metallic scent lingering faintly. The experience had left an invisible mark. Something in the forest had observed us, interacted with us, and allowed us to leave, but only on its terms. Even as we hiked toward the trailhead, the forest seemed to follow, in the rustle of leaves, the shift of shadows, the faint tang of metal in the air. We didn't speak, didn't joke. There was nothing to say. The forest had revealed itself that night, patient, deliberate, and terrifyingly aware. And it would wait for the next visitors just as it had waited for us. Camping is not just a retreat into nature. Sometimes it is a test, a reminder that the forest is alive, that it watches, that it remembers. And sometimes it waits for those who dare to enter its domain again. The morning after the second night was quiet, almost unnervingly so. The forest had released us, but its presence lingered. Even as the sun pierced through the treetops, casting a soft gold across the campsite, the shadows seemed darker in comparison, stretching along the ground with an intent that made my skin crawl. My friends moved about, gathering gear, preparing for a short hike to shake off the unease, but every step they took seemed slower, cautious, as though the forest itself watched their movements. We decided to follow a trail that led deeper into the woods, one that we hadn't noticed the day before. The forest thickened quickly, the canopy blocking most of the sunlight, leaving the trail in a dim, almost twilight state, even in mid-morning. Roots twisted over the path like gnarled fingers, and fallen leaves muffled our footsteps. Every sound seemed amplified, the crunch of twigs, the scrape of boots over rock, even the gentle flow of a hidden stream off to the side. The deeper we went, the more the forest seemed to respond to us, shifting subtly, rearranging itself, creating pockets of darkness that hadn't been there moments before. I led the way, flashlight hanging from my belt despite the daylight, just in case. Every instinct told me to stay alert. The metallic scent from the previous night had returned, faint but unmistakable, curling around the underbrush and making the forest feel oppressive, alive in a way that was almost sentient. My friends whispered quietly to each other, trying to sound casual, but the tension in their voices betrayed the unease settling over all of us. About an hour into our hike, we stumbled across a clearing. It was smaller than our campsite, but similar in its deceptive calm. In the center, a rusted fire pit sat, surrounded by half-burned logs, ash scattered on the ground. I knelt and examined it, noticing faint footprints in the damp earth, small, human-shaped, and unlike any of ours. My pulse quickened. My friends gathered behind me, their expressions a mix of curiosity and dread. "Someone's been here recently," one whispered. I shook my head. "No, it's too precise, too deliberate. And the prints, they're like the ones from our campsite." A shiver ran down my spine. The forest seemed to hold its breath. Birds that had been singing earlier fell silent. The wind that had rustled through the treetops softened into a subtle whisper, carrying with it the metallic tang that had haunted the last 2 nights. I felt the weight of eyes on us, unblinking, patient, deliberate. We continued along the trail, now moving more cautiously. Every step was measured, every glance over the shoulder deliberate. I couldn't shake the feeling that the forest itself was shaping the path, guiding us, testing us. The creek we had passed earlier wound alongside the trail again, its soft babble distorted, almost mournful, as if echoing our fear back at us. By late afternoon, we decided to set up a temporary camp near the water, thinking a closer source of light and sound might deter whatever watched us. The sun was dipping toward the horizon, and the forest began its transformation into shadows. Even with our fire roaring, the darkness beyond the circle of light seemed to pulse, almost breathing, shifting subtly, as if aware of our presence. As night fell, the metallic scent intensified. It wound between the trees, around our tent poles, under the canvas, and mingled with the smoke from the fire. The first footsteps came quietly, almost hesitant, moving around the perimeter of the clearing. I recognized the rhythm from the previous night, slow, measured, deliberate. Not animal, not accidental. Watching. My friends whispered nervously, but I could barely respond. The footsteps circled again, closer this time. I shone my flashlight toward the tree line, catching glimpses of movement. Shadows bending unnaturally, shifting, flitting between the trees, but never revealing themselves. The forest seemed to respond to the light, bending and twisting, almost amused by our attempts to expose it. Hours passed. The forest became a symphony of tension, the creek's water louder now, echoing, the leaves rustling with a purpose, the wind carrying whispered messages too faint to decipher, but heavy enough to unsettle. A soft moan reached our ears, human-like yet distorted, rising from deep within the trees and fading again, leaving a silence that pressed on us like a tangible weight. Around 1:45 a.m., a more deliberate sound came, branches snapping under careful pressure. Footsteps again, multiple now, moving with synchronized intent, circling closer, retreating, then circling again. My flashlight revealed nothing but a forest alive with shadows. My heart pounded, throat dry, palms sweating. I whispered softly into the dark, "We know you're here. Please leave us alone." The forest did not respond. It held the sentence in place, stretched it into every corner, waited for our reactions. The hours stretched endlessly. Every small sound became amplified. The snap of a twig, the rustle of leaves, the distant call of a night creature. Each was interpreted by my mind as something deliberate, intelligent, aware. The metallic scent wrapped around us more insistently, clinging to skin, hair, clothing, leaving a taste on the tongue. I could feel the presence of something unseen, testing us, measuring fear, patience, endurance. At 3:17 a.m. I saw it, a shadow, tall and thin, bending unnaturally between the trees. It didn't walk. It glided, deliberate in motion, never exposing itself fully to the light of our fire. I froze. My friends stirred in their tents, reacting instinctively to the shift in the air, but I could feel it, watching, patient, deliberate. It paused for a moment, and then was gone, leaving only silence and the metallic tang lingering in the air. By the time dawn arrived, none of us had slept. We sat around the fire silently, moving mechanically, our minds alert to every sound. The forest had released us, yet its presence was palpable. Footprints from the night were gone, erased without a trace, yet the memory remained. Something had watched, waited, and judged us. We packed in silence. The forest seemed to exhale as we left, shadows shrinking back into the tree line, yet a faint sense of awareness followed us. Every rustle of leaves on the trail, every snapping branch, every shifting shadow seemed to echo the forest's memory of us. It had recorded our presence, measured our fear, and allowed us to leave, but only on its terms. Even now, thinking of that night makes my skin crawl. Every camping trip I've taken since, every forest I've entered, carries that memory. A reminder, the woods are not empty. They remember, they watch, and sometimes they wait. The fourth morning arrived quietly, almost deceptively. The sun pierced the canopy of trees, casting long fingers of light over our campsite, but the tension that had accompanied us all night had not lifted. The forest seemed aware of our movements, bending subtly as we packed, shadows stretching unnaturally across the ground, following us in silence. Each sound, the rustle of our tents, the scrape of zippers, the shifting of backpacks, felt magnified, recorded, observed. We debated whether to push deeper into the woods or head back to the trailhead. My friends were visibly shaken, moving mechanically, avoiding eye contact with each other. The forest had left its impression on us, an invisible mark that could not be erased. The metallic tang in the air lingered faintly, weaving between pine and soil, a subtle reminder of the night's events. We chose to stay a bit longer, hoping that daylight would grant us some semblance of safety. We followed the creek deeper into the forest, its water sparkling under the morning light, trickling over stones in a rhythm that was oddly soothing. Yet beneath that calm, the forest remained alive, shifting imperceptibly, watching. Each footfall along the soft earth seemed to draw attention, every movement noted. The trail narrowed, roots and rocks twisting across the path like obstacles set deliberately. I kept my flashlight ready despite the brightness, a habit born from fear rather than necessity. Branches brushed against my sleeves, leaves whispered secrets I couldn't understand. It was as though the forest was alive in a way that had no name, older than thought, patient, deliberate. Around mid-morning, we stumbled upon an abandoned structure, what looked like a ranger's outpost or a small cabin, worn and forgotten. The wood was weathered, grey, and splintered. Windows were cracked, doors slightly ajar, hinges creaking in the gentle wind. The sight should have been reassuring, human-made amidst the chaos of the forest, but it felt off. The air here carried the same metallic scent, more pungent now, mingled with rot and dampness. We approached cautiously, scanning for signs of life, human or otherwise. Inside, dust covered every surface. Broken furniture lay scattered, and faded markings on the walls hinted at messages long forgotten. Footprints, too small, too precise, lined the floor, leading from one side of the room to the other. They circled, paused, then vanished. The sensation of being watched returned immediately, pressing in from every corner. "Someone's been here recently," one friend whispered. I shook my head. "Not recently, not human, not in any way we understand." My voice sounded strange to me, almost fragile, as if acknowledging the truth of the forest's presence weakened me. We left the cabin quickly, moving back into the trail, but the feeling of eyes following didn't diminish. Each step was deliberate, measured. The forest remembered. By late afternoon, we found another clearing. This one was smaller, surrounded by older trees, gnarled and thick, their trunks twisted like the fingers of giants. The fire we built was small, controlled, a weak barrier against the shadows pressing close. As night approached, the familiar sense of dread returned. The metallic tang returned more insistently, curling into our clothing, our hair, our skin, reminding us that we were not alone. The first footsteps came slowly circling the fire. I recognized them immediately. They were precise, patient, deliberate, not accidental, not animal, watching. My friends froze, moving closer together, eyes wide, unblinking. I aimed my flashlight toward the tree line. Shadows flickered unnaturally, bending in impossible ways, shapes darting just out of reach, never fully revealed.
Hours stretched into a rhythm of tension and waiting. Every small sound was magnified. The creek's distant babble, the rustle of leaves, the crack of branches. Then a soft, low moan drifted from deep within the trees, human-like yet distorted, echoing between trunks and fading into silence. My chest tightened. My friends whispered cautiously to each other, but the forest paid no attention. It was patient, deliberate, waiting for us to react.
By 1:20 a.m., multiple footsteps circled closer. They were accompanied now by soft scraping noises, deliberate and rhythmic, echoing against distant trees. I tried to shine my flashlight, catching glimpses of tall, thin shadows gliding between the trees. The shapes were deliberate, almost sentient, reacting to the light as if mocking our attempts to see them. My pulse pounded, throat dry, hands gripping the flashlight until the knuckles whitened. The metallic scent grew stronger, almost choking, curling into every corner of the clearing, mixing with the smoke from our fire. It wrapped around our legs, our tents, lingering like a tangible presence. I whispered again into the darkness, "We know you're here. Leave us alone." Silence followed, heavier than any sound, pressing into our minds, testing our resolve. Hours passed in a slow, agonizing rhythm. Every crack of a branch, every rustle of leaves, every distant sound became amplified, interpreted as deliberate. My friends were silent, tense, their movements minimal. Sleep was impossible. The forest was alive around us, aware of our fear, measuring our endurance, our reactions, our patience. At 3:43 a.m. I caught movement. A shadow, tall and unnaturally thin, glided between the trees, pausing, bending unnaturally as if observing, analyzing. It didn't walk, it floated. I froze completely, heart hammering, stomach twisting. My friends stirred slightly in their tents, shifting instinctively to the subtle change in the air. The shadow paused, unblinking, then disappeared into the forest, leaving only silence and the metallic tang lingering. By dawn, we were exhausted. No one slept. We sat around the fire, moving mechanically, eyes scanning the tree line, aware that even in daylight the forest had not released us fully. Footprints had vanished, erased, without a trace, but the memory of them burned into our minds. Something had watched, measured, judged, and allowed us to leave, but only on its terms. We packed our belongings silently. The forest seemed to exhale as we moved toward the trailhead, shadows shrinking but awareness lingering. Every snapping twig, every shifting leaf, every rustle of branches reminded me that the woods remembered us. They remembered fear. They remembered presence. And they would wait patiently for the next visitors to enter their domain. Even now, when I think back to those nights, I feel the forest pressing in, silent but observant. Camping is no longer a simple retreat. Sometimes it is a test. Sometimes nature itself is alive in ways you cannot see. And sometimes it waits deliberately, patiently, for those who dare to enter. we decided to take a trip out to the old cornfield just outside of town. It wasn't on any maps, just a stretch of land abandoned for decades, but the locals had stories, whispers about things that shouldn't be there, about lights in the night, about visitors who went in and never came out the same. We laughed it off at first, thinking it would be harmless fun. 3 friends, a cooler full of snacks, flashlights, and a sense of adventure. But the closer we got, the more the air changed. The road leading to the cornfield was narrow and cracked, weeds pushing through every crevice, old signs warning of private property faded almost completely. The forest pressed against the road on one side and the cornfield spread out on the other, yellowed and brittle with the end of summer. Even in daylight, the stalks moved in strange patterns, bending as if whispering secrets to one another. We parked the car near the edge of the field, stepping carefully onto the dirt. The sun was low, brushing the top of the cornstalks with golden light, shadows stretching long across the field. The air smelled of dry earth, crushed leaves, and something faintly metallic, familiar now, like a warning we couldn't name. "Feel wrong?" I said, trying to keep it light. "Come on," my friend laughed, though the nervous twitch in his shoulder betrayed him. "It's just a cornfield." We stepped inside. The stalks surrounded us almost immediately, tall and brittle, rustling with a sound too deliberate to be wind alone. The path we made was narrow, twisting, forcing us closer together. The deeper we went, the thicker the corn grew, and the sunlight that had once lit the path became fragmented, piercing only in slivers, creating moving shadows that danced across our shoulders, across our faces. Something about the way the corn shifted made my skin crawl. It wasn't just the rustle of stalks, it was a subtle movement, almost as if the field itself were alive. Each step we took echoed strangely, not just on the ground, but in the hollow spaces between the stalks, bouncing back at us in ways that didn't match our movements. A sense of being watched settled over me immediately, pressing against my back, brushing against my neck, following with patience. We found a small clearing about 50 yards in. There was a rusted old tractor half sunk into the earth, weeds climbing over it like veins. The paint had peeled long ago, leaving bare metal streaked with rust. The tires were flat, cracked. It should have been unremarkable, just a forgotten relic, but it carried a weight, a presence. My friends joked about ghosts of farmers past, but even in jest, their voices trembled slightly. We set down our gear and decided to explore further, making a rough circle around the clearing. The deeper we went, the more the corn seemed to close in around us. Every movement made a sound that bounced back in unnatural ways, making it difficult to tell what was real and what wasn't. The metallic scent returned, faint at first, but growing stronger with each step, curling in the heat, lingering in the air like an unseen hand brushing against our arms. Then we saw it, a figure just at the edge of our vision moving between the stalks, thin, humanoid, but somehow elongated, bending unnaturally, gliding rather than walking. I froze. My friends stopped immediately behind me, their own movements arrested by the same sight. The figure didn't approach, but moved with awareness, deliberate and patient, testing our reactions without revealing itself fully. "Did you see that?" I whispered. They nodded, pale, eyes wide. No one spoke beyond that. Our laughter, our bravado, had disappeared completely. The cornfield, once a simple curiosity, had become alive, aware of us, and patient in its observation. We decided to push onward, cautiously, trying to maintain some sense of control. Every step forward was deliberate, measured. Every rustle of stalks, every snap of a dry leaf seemed to have intent. The shadows between the stalks shifted in ways that defied logic, bending toward us, retreating, reshaping themselves when we tried to focus.
Hours passed. The sun dipped lower, leaving long, golden streaks that quickly turned to amber. then shadow. We tried to stay calm, keeping our flashlights ready, but the further we went, the more the metallic scent intensified, curling into our clothing, our hair, into our very lungs. I could feel my pulse quicken, throat tight. Every nerve screamed that the field was not just watching, it was aware of every hesitation, every fear.
By twilight, we stumbled upon another clearing, smaller this time. In its center, a scarecrow, or at least what had once been one. Its clothing was tattered, stained, face a crude mask of burlap, sewn with features that were almost human. The stalks around it were bent inward, forming a perfect circle. The sight should have been innocuous, even comical, but it carried an aura of malice. The shadows of the corn seemed to lean toward it, as if bowing to some unseen authority. We moved around it carefully, keeping our distance. Each rustle of corn stalks was deliberate, echoing off the space between, bouncing back at us in a rhythm that felt almost like a heartbeat. I realized, with cold clarity, that the field was alive in some way we couldn't comprehend. It watched, it measured, it waited. Night arrived and the temperature dropped rapidly. The cornfield, once warm in the late summer sun, became chilling. Shadows lengthened and merged, swallowing paths we thought we had marked. The metallic scent was thick now, curling in the cold air, a subtle taste in our mouths, a warning of things unseen. Footsteps came again, not ours, not the wind. Slow, deliberate, circling, testing us. We huddled together, flashlights slicing weak beams through the stalks. I could see my friends' faces pale, eyes wide, bodies tense. The forest of corn was patient, deliberate, and intelligent. Every sound, every flicker of movement, every subtle shift in air carried a message. You are not alone. Hours stretched like days. Every snap of a stalk, every distant rustle amplified our fear. The figure we glimpsed earlier returned, gliding between the stalks, bending unnaturally, never fully visible. We whispered, tried to rationalize, but rationality had no place here. The cornfield had its own rules. It observed, it judged, it waited. By the time dawn arrived, exhaustion and terror had left us hollow. Footprints, shadows, and traces of movement surrounded us but vanished as quickly as they appeared, leaving only memory. The field had released us grudgingly, allowing us to exit, but only after recording our fear, our hesitation, our presence. We emerged onto the road in silence, the sunlight washing over us, bright and blinding. The air outside the field felt normal, warm, safe. But the memory of the cornfield remained, etched into our minds. Rustling stalks, the metallic scent, the elongated figure. It would wait, patiently, deliberately, for the next curious visitors. Even now, when I close my eyes, I see those shadows, hear those footsteps, feel that presence pressing close. Camping, hiking, exploring, none of it is safe if the forest or field remembers, and if it chooses to observe, patient and deliberate. And sometimes you leave, but the memory never leaves you. The night in the cornfield was far worse than we had imagined. Darkness swallowed the paths we had made earlier, and the stalks, brittle and swaying, bent in unnatural ways, almost as if the field itself were breathing. Every footstep echoed back in unpredictable rhythms, distorting our sense of direction. The wind rustled through the stalks, but it was no ordinary wind. It carried whispers, faint, unintelligible, like voices just beyond comprehension. The metallic scent lingered, stronger than ever, clinging to our clothes and skin, filling our lungs with every inhalation. We huddled around a small campfire, its light insufficient to push the shadows back. My friends were visibly shaken, glancing over shoulders, shifting positions, avoiding eye contact. The field had claimed the upper hand, asserting its awareness, its presence. I could feel it circling us, patient, deliberate, unseen, testing our resolve. "Did you hear that?" one whispered. I nodded, heart pounding. There it was again, a rustling that didn't belong to wind or animals, a step that wasn't ours, moving with precision around our clearing. The stalk swayed, bending as if to reveal something, then snapping upright as soon as we looked. The sense of being watched pressed in from all sides. We tried to laugh, tried to make light, but it sounded hollow, forced, even to our own ears. The figure from earlier returned, gliding between the stalks at the edge of the firelight. Taller, thinner than a human, elongated in ways that made the shadows it cast impossible to follow. It paused, bending toward us without approaching, measuring, observing. The air grew colder, heavier, and the metallic tang intensified, curling around our hands, our hair, our faces. Every instinct told me to leave immediately, but the others were frozen, held in place by fear, awe, or disbelief.
Minutes stretched into hours. Every sound became amplified. The snap of a twig, the rustle of leaves, the distant murmur of an unseen animal. Each felt deliberate, intentional. The field moved around us, responding to our thoughts, our fear, our hesitation. I realized that the cornfield was alive in a way that had no name, patient and sentient. It knew we were intruders. It knew we were afraid, and it was waiting.
Then came the whisper. Low, guttural, impossible to locate, carried from deep within the stalks. "Leave! Leave!" it said, or at least I thought it did. My voice caught in my throat, pulse racing. My friends didn't speak, didn't move, but I could feel them trembling beside me. The whisper repeated, each time closer, each time more insistent. The shadows of the stalks shifted in response, bending toward the voice, forming shapes that seemed to mimic human limbs before dissolving back into darkness. I grabbed a flashlight and aimed it at the tree line. Movement flickered just beyond the beam. The elongated figure glided again, bending impossibly, shifting through shadows, remaining just out of reach. My heart hammered. Every instinct screamed to run, but I stayed, frozen, as if witnessing something older, patient, and terrifyingly aware. Hours passed with no real change. The forest of corn was patient, deliberate. It circled us, shifted around us, tested us. The metallic scent became choking, wrapping around our lungs, our throats, forcing coughs that echoed through the night. I tried to calm myself, whispering to the others that we needed to stay calm, to move carefully. But calm was an illusion here. Fear had already marked us. Around 1:50 a.m., the figure returned closer. This time, it paused at the edge of the clearing, its elongated silhouette outlined against the flickering firelight. It didn't speak. It didn't move. It simply observed, patient, deliberate. The firelight stretched its shadow across the field, twisting it into forms that defied reason. I could feel the presence pressing in, tangible and cold. Suddenly a sound from deeper in the cornfield, a low, guttural groan, almost human but distorted, echoed toward us. The stalks bent and swayed as if in response, leaning inward to amplify the noise. My friends shivered, closer together now, eyes wide, lips pale. The metallic scent thickened, curling in the cold air, as if the field itself were breathing around us, aware of our panic. I tried to speak, to call out, but the words caught in my throat. The figure remained still, patient, deliberate. Time seemed to stretch indefinitely, each moment heavier than the last. Every movement we made was watched, measured, judged. We were intruders, and the cornfield had full awareness of our presence. By 3 a.m. the shadows shifted again. 2 more figures emerged at the edge of the clearing, taller, thinner, gliding, bending unnaturally. They didn't approach but moved in synchronized patterns, circling us in a rhythm that felt almost ritualistic. The field responded to their presence, stalks swaying toward them, bowing as though acknowledging some authority beyond our comprehension. Panic began to set in. My hands shook as I clutched the flashlight, trying to remain calm, but the others were frozen, unable to speak or move. Every rustle, every snap of a stalk, every whisper carried intent. We were being measured, observed, catalogued by something that was neither human nor animal, but aware, sentient, and patient. The metallic scent became overwhelming. It burned our noses, filled our mouths, lingered on our skin. Each inhale made my lungs ache. The elongated figures moved with precision, weaving between stalks, gliding silently, bending impossibly, observing without approach. The firelight flickered, shadows dancing in impossible angles, stretching the figures into grotesque forms. By 4:15 a.m. the figures had disappeared, retreating into the dense corn. The field seemed to settle as though satisfied, patient, but still aware. Silence returned, heavier than before, pressing against our ears, our minds. The metallic scent lingered faintly, a reminder that we had been observed, measured, and allowed to leave. As dawn broke, we emerged from the cornfield. The sun's light felt foreign after hours in shadows. The field behind us swayed in the morning breeze, golden stalks bending like a sigh, patient, deliberate, waiting for the next visitors. We walked in silence, carrying the memory of shadows, whispers, and the metallic tang. Every rustle, every breeze, every fleeting shadow reminded us that the cornfield had not forgotten. Even now I remember every detail. The figures gliding between the stalks, bending impossibly, patient and deliberate. The whispers from the dark, the metallic scent curling in the air, and the certainty that the cornfield waits for those who dare to enter, measuring fear, patience, and resolve. Camping, hiking, exploring. These are never simple escapes. Sometimes nature is aware, alive in ways you cannot see, deliberate in its observation, patient in its judgment. And sometimes it waits. The following night in the cornfield was worse than anything we could have imagined. Darkness came swiftly, swallowing every pathway we had explored during daylight. The stalks, brittle and sun-bleached, bent and twisted unnaturally in the dim light of our flashlights. Each movement of the stalk seemed deliberate, as if the cornfield were alive and aware of our intrusion. Shadows stretched and shifted, taking on grotesque shapes, bending toward us, and then recoiling when we tried to focus. Our small campfire struggled to hold back the darkness, the weak glow illuminating only a few feet of clearing around us. The air was thick with the metallic scent we had noticed during our first night here, curling into our clothing, hair, even lungs. Every inhalation carried it deeper, a warning that this field was far from ordinary. The whispering sounds returned, low, unintelligible, echoing from the dense stalks around us. They were not voices we could understand, but their intent was clear. They were meant to terrify, to warn, to push us toward leaving. "Do you feel that?" one of my friends whispered. I nodded. Every hair on my body stood on end. The steps, deliberate and soft, circled the perimeter of our clearing. Not animal, not accidental. The stalks swayed as though responding to some invisible force, bending toward the sound and then snapping back. My flashlight caught fleeting glimpses of movement at the edges of the light, elongated shadows gliding, bending unnaturally, always just out of reach. We tried to stay calm, huddling together, whispering reassurances, but the fear was mutual and consuming. Every snap of a twig, every rustle of a leaf, every whisper of wind felt orchestrated, calculated to keep us on edge. The cornfield was alive, aware, and it tested our patience deliberately, stretching moments into eternity. Hours passed in tense silence, Every sound, every shadow seemed to have intent. The elongated figures we glimpsed earlier returned intermittently, moving with precision, circling, observing, never approaching, but always aware of our presence. The metallic scent intensified, curling in the cold air, thickening, making each breath a struggle. I realized the cornfield was not just watching, it was assessing, cataloguing, judging. We were intruders, and it measured our fear with meticulous care. Around 1:45 a.m. the figures glided closer. This time they moved with a synchronized rhythm, weaving through the stalks in patterns that defied logic. They paused, bending unnaturally, observing our reactions. I could see their shadows stretch impossibly across the ground, contorting in ways that made my stomach twist. My friends remained frozen, huddled together, eyes wide with panic. The cornfield responded to the figures, stalks bowing as though acknowledging some unseen hierarchy. The whispers returned, closer now, more insistent, low, guttural, almost human-like. They circled us in the darkness, merging with the rustle of the stalks. Each repetition of the whisper carried a subtle variation, a rhythm meant to unnerve, to break our composure. My pulse raced, my throat tightened. The firelight flickered violently, casting shadows that twisted across the clearing, distorting the figures' forms even further. By 2:30 a.m. the presence of the field was overwhelming. Every stalk seemed to lean toward us, the whispers pressing into our ears, the metallic scent thickening to almost unbearable levels. The figures moved with a deliberate patience, weaving between stalks, gliding, bending impossibly, observing without approach. Each movement felt purposeful, a test, an examination of our fear, our courage, our endurance. Suddenly, from deep within the cornfield, came a groan. Not human, not animal, something in between. The stalk surrounding it bent inward, amplifying the sound, echoing through the field like a living chamber. My friends shivered violently, clutching each other, pale and wide-eyed. The metallic scent seemed to tighten around us like an invisible grip. I whispered, trying to sound calm. We need to stay calm, move slowly. But calm was impossible. The field had already claimed us, marking our fear, our hesitation, our presence. Around 3:15 a.m. one of my friends screamed, a short, sharp cry. I swung my flashlight toward him. His eyes were wide with terror. He pointed at a figure gliding just above the ground, impossibly thin, bending in ways no human could. Its form was shadowed, but it had presence, awareness, and an intention we could not comprehend. The other figures had joined it, forming a loose circle, circling the fire, and us like predators testing prey. The metallic scent intensified, thick and choking, curling into every corner of the clearing, wrapping around our limbs, our hair, our faces. Each inhale burned. The firelight flickered violently, casting elongated shadows across the clearing. The whispers became distinct words, fragmented and indecipherable, but their threat was unmistakable. "Leave! Leave! Leave!" repeated in a rhythm that matched the circling figures. We huddled together, frozen, unwilling to make sudden movements. Every snap of a stalk, every rustle of leaves, every whisper from the darkness seemed deliberate, a calculated test. The field's intelligence, its awareness, became undeniable. It was patient, deliberate, sentient. It was aware of every heartbeat, every shiver, every thought racing through our minds. Time lost meaning. Each movement, each sound, each flicker of shadow was a trial, stretching minutes into hours. The figures glided between stalks, bending impossibly, never fully visible, yet entirely aware of our presence. The metallic scent lingered oppressive, thickening with each inhalation, burning our lungs, reminding us of the inescapable reality of the field. By 4 a.m. the figures began to retreat. Slowly, deliberately, they melted into the stalks, leaving the clearing empty, yet not safe. The metallic scent lingered faintly, a reminder that we had been observed, measured, allowed to leave, but only on the field's terms. Silence returned, heavier than before, pressing against our ears, our minds. Every rustle, every snap, every fleeting shadow was a memory of what had occurred. When dawn finally broke, it felt surreal. Sunlight filtered weakly through the corn, bright and foreign, washing over our exhausted, pale faces. The field swayed in the gentle morning breeze, golden stalks bending like a sigh, patient, deliberate, waiting for the next intruders. We walked back in silence, carrying the memory of shadows, whispers, and the metallic scent. Every breeze, every rustle, every fleeting shadow reminded us that the cornfield had not forgotten. Even now, months later, I can close my eyes and see the figures, feel the metallic tang, hear the whispers and footsteps circling in rhythm. The cornfield waits, always patient, always deliberate, measuring fear, patience, and resolve. By the fourth night in the cornfield, we were bone-tired, mentally frayed, and physically tense. The sun had disappeared hours ago, leaving nothing but black shadows, the rustle of stalks and the cold, metallic tang curling through the air. The fire we had built flickered weakly, a fragile barrier against the oppressive darkness that seemed to breathe around us. Every movement of the corn felt deliberate, purposeful, as if it was aware of us and measuring our resolve. We tried to stay calm, huddling close, whispering reassurances to one another. But calm was an illusion. Each snap of a dry stalk, each rustle of leaves, each whisper carried intent. The elongated figures from the previous nights glided between the stalks, bending unnaturally, circling the clearing with patience and precision. They did not approach, yet their presence pressed in on us, cold, heavy, and undeniable. The metallic scent intensified, curling into our lungs, burning with each breath. I tried to speak, to call out to them, but the words caught in my throat. My friends trembled beside me, whispering fragmented sentences, trying to rationalize the impossible. Rationality had no place here. The cornfield was aware, sentient, patient, and deliberate. It waited, recording our fear, our hesitation, and our every movement. Hours passed in a slow, agonizing rhythm. Every rustle, every snap, every shadow seemed orchestrated, calculated to test our nerves. The elongated figures moved with synchronized precision, gliding, bending impossibly, circling us in a rhythm we could not comprehend. Their shadows twisted across the clearing in grotesque patterns, contorting into impossible angles before melting back into darkness. Then came the whispering, low, guttural, unintelligible, yet unmistakably aware of our presence. "Leave! Leave!" it repeated, each iteration growing closer, more insistent. The stalks leaned inward, amplifying the sound, bending as if in recognition of the figure's authority. My friends clutched one another, pale and wide-eyed, their whispers lost to the overwhelming pressure of the field. Around 1:30 a.m., one of the figures moved closer, gliding over the uneven ground with impossible precision. Its elongated silhouette was outlined against the flickering firelight, bending unnaturally, defying all logic. My heart pounded. Every instinct screamed to run, but our bodies were frozen, paralyzed by the realization that we were being observed by something intelligent, deliberate, and patient. Footsteps, not ours, circled the perimeter of the clearing, deliberate and rhythmic. They echoed unnaturally, bouncing back from the dense stalks in ways that disoriented us, making it impossible to determine direction. The field itself seemed to move in response, stalks bending, twisting, leaning as though alive, aware of every tremor of fear in our bodies. By 2:15 a.m., exhaustion threatened to overtake us, but sleep was impossible. Every shadow, every movement of the stalks, every whisper reminded us that we were intruders in a space we could not understand. The metallic scent burned in our lungs, wrapping around us like a tangible presence, a constant reminder of the awareness surrounding us. The figures shifted closer, circling, bending, gliding in synchronized patterns. They paused at intervals, observing, testing, measuring our reactions. The firelight flickered violently, elongating their forms into grotesque silhouettes that twisted across the clearing. Each movement was deliberate, each sound orchestrated to maintain our fear, to remind us that the cornfield held full control over our environment. Around 3 a.m. a groan came from deep within the cornfield. Not human, not animal. It resonated in a way that made the stalks bend and sway toward the sound. The figures paused, seemingly acknowledging the noise, their elongated forms bending in impossible ways, almost as if bowing to something unseen. The metallic scent intensified, thick and choking, curling into every breath, every movement. My friends began to whisper frantically, trying to rationalize what we were witnessing. I shushed them gently, knowing that even a small sound could draw attention. The figures responded subtly to every movement we made, circling us with patient precision, testing our fear, our courage, and our endurance. The cornfield itself seemed to pulse with awareness, bending and swaying as if alive, deliberate and intelligent. Hours dragged into a torturous rhythm of fear. Each snap of a stalk, each rustle, each whispered sound was magnified, amplified, deliberate. The figures continued their slow, methodical dance around us, bending impossibly, gliding and retreating just out of reach. The fire sputtered, casting flickering shadows across their grotesque silhouettes, stretching and twisting them into unrecognizable shapes. By 4:15 a.m., the figures began to withdraw. Slowly, deliberately, they melted into the dense corn, leaving the clearing empty but not safe. The metallic scent lingered faintly, a reminder that we had been observed, measured, and allowed to leave, but only on the cornfield's terms. Silence returned, heavier than ever, pressing against our minds and ears. Every rustle, every shadow, every fleeting movement reminded us of the omnipresent awareness surrounding us. As dawn approached, the first light filtered weakly through the corn, illuminating the field in a surreal glow. We emerged from the cornfield, exhausted, pale and silent. The stalks swayed gently in the morning breeze, patient, deliberate, waiting for the next intruders. Every sound, the wind, the rustle of leaves, the distant caw of a crow, reminded us that the field had not forgotten. Even now, months later, I can recall every detail. The elongated figures gliding between the stalks, bending impossibly, patient and deliberate. The whispers circling in the darkness, the metallic tang that lingered in the air, and the realization that the cornfield waits for those who dare to enter, measuring their fear, patience, and resolve. Camping, exploring, even casual curiosity, none of it is simple when the field remembers. The memory of being watched, of the deliberate patience of the figures, of the metallic scent that clung to our lungs, these remain long after leaving. The cornfield has its rules. It waits, it observes, and it decides who is allowed to leave. The abandoned summer camp had been empty for years, left to rot in the heat of the sun and the weight of the forest reclaiming it. We had heard rumors as kids, stories of campers disappearing without trace, of strange laughter echoing through the cabins at night, of shadows moving where no one should have been. Now, as adults, we decided to explore it, armed with flashlights, cameras, and the naive bravery of youth, thinking fear is a choice. The path leading to the camp was overgrown, weeds taller than our knees, and branches clawing at our clothes as if warning us to turn back. The forest pressed in on both sides, dense and dark, the smell of decay heavy in the air. When we finally reached the clearing where the camp once thrived, the sight was haunting. Wooden cabins with peeling paint leaned at odd angles. Rusted swings creaked slowly in the breeze. The lake that had once been the heart of the camp was choked with algae, the water still and dark, reflecting the grey sky above. "Looks worse than I imagined," one of my friends muttered. I nodded. The camp felt alive, but not in a good way. The air was heavy, almost expectant, as if waiting for something to happen. Every step we took on the gravel paths echoed oddly, bouncing back in distorted rhythms that made it hard to tell how far the sounds were travelling. Shadows clung to the cabins and trees, twisting unnaturally, reaching toward us, then recoiling when we tried to focus. We entered the first cabin. The door groaned in protest, swinging open to reveal a room coated in dust and cobwebs. Old bunks lay in disarray, mattresses faded and torn, personal belongings left behind, as if the campers had vanished suddenly. Papers scattered across the floor, photographs yellowed with age, a shoe half buried under a collapsed bunk. Every corner seemed to harbour shadows, waiting, watching. I shone my flashlight across the room. The beam caught a figure, or what appeared to be a figure, in the corner, leaning against the wall. My stomach dropped. It was gone when I blinked. My friends froze, and for a moment, no one spoke. The camp felt alive, aware and patient, like a predator assessing its prey. We moved cautiously to the next cabin, the floorboards creaking under our weight. Outside, the swings squeaked rhythmically, moving without wind, casting long, dancing shadows across the clearing. The forest surrounding the camp pressed in, enclosing us, making the air feel thick and suffocating. Each cabin we entered seemed to tell the same story: abandoned lives frozen in time, personal items left behind, shadows that didn't belong to the trees. The sun dipped lower, turning the sky to amber. The cabins, once harmless structures, now felt like looming sentinels. The forest around us shifted subtly. Leaves rustled without breeze. Branches snapped in the distance, rhythmic and deliberate. The camp was awake, aware of our presence, and patient in its observation. We approached the main lodge, its doors hanging crookedly on rusted hinges. Inside, the smell of rot was stronger, a mixture of decaying wood, mould, and something metallic, sharp, lingering in the air. Long tables, once covered in dishes and laughter, were coated in dust. Broken chairs lay on the floor, some stacked unnaturally, as if arranged by unseen hands. Shadows pooled in corners, stretching and twisting as our flashlights passed over them. One of my friends whispered, "I don't like this. Something's wrong here." I nodded silently. The air felt heavy with anticipation. Every rustle, every snap, every fleeting shadow seemed deliberate, designed to unsettle, to remind us we were intruders. We tried to rationalize, tried to explain it as our imagination, but the camp did not feel imaginary. It was patient, deliberate, and aware. Night fell fully. The forest closed in. Darkness pooled in the clearing like liquid, swallowing the cabins and paths. Our flashlights cut thin beams through the shadows, illuminating glimpses of movement that vanished the moment we focused. A swing creaked slowly, moving back and forth without wind. The water of the lake lapped gently against the shore, yet no sound of animals or insects accompanied it. Silence pressed against us, heavy and deliberate. As we moved toward the lake, a faint figure appeared at the edge of the tree line. Tall, thin, elongated, bending unnaturally, watching us with patience. It didn't approach, didn't speak, just observed, blending with the shadows. The metallic tang returned, faint but undeniable, curling in the air and our lungs. My friends froze, and I could feel my pulse quicken, throat tightening with tension. We tried to laugh nervously, to break the tension, but the sound felt hollow. The figure remained, patient and deliberate. Every movement we made was observed, measured, judged. The camp, the forest, the figure, it was all aware. Time lost meaning. Each moment stretched, heavy and suffocating. Around midnight, we found the old activity hall. Its doors were barely hanging on rusted hinges. Inside, tables were overturned, broken chairs scattered, remnants of past games and crafts frozen in dust. Shadows pooled at the edges of the room, stretching and bending. One of my friends pointed to a corner where a bundle of shadows seemed to move slightly. I trained my flashlight there, and for a split second, I saw a figure, elongated, thin, bending impossibly. Then it was gone. The whispers began, low, guttural, almost human, yet distorted. They circled the room, bouncing off the walls, echoing in ways that defied logic. "Leave! Leave!" the whispers said, indistinct but insistent. My friends huddled closer, trembling, silent except for short, panicked breaths. We tried to move, to leave, but every exit seemed farther, more distant than it had moments before. The camp shifted subtly. Corridors seemed longer, shadows deeper, air heavier. The forest outside the windows pressed in, bending the shadows of the cabins into impossible shapes. The metallic scent intensified, curling in our lungs, thickening with each breath, a reminder of the awareness surrounding us. Hours passed in tense silence. Every creak of wood, every rustle of leaves, every whisper of wind carried intent. The figure returned intermittently, gliding, bending, observing without approaching. The camp itself seemed alive, moving in response to our fear. Each moment was a trial, a test, a record of our presence. By 3:30 a.m. the figures retreated into the shadows, leaving us in silence but not safety. The metallic scent lingered faintly, a reminder of what had been, of what was watching. We moved slowly, cautiously, trying to retrace our steps to the path, the clearing, the car. Every shadow seemed alive, every movement deliberate, every breath heavy with anticipation. Dawn broke finally, washing the camp in pale, weak light. The cabins, the lake, the forest, they all appeared inert, harmless, but the memory of night lingered. Shadows gliding, whispers circling, metallic tang in the air. These were etched into our minds. The camp had allowed us to leave, but only after marking our fear, our presence, and our awareness. Even now, when I think of that abandoned summer camp, I remember the patience of the figures, the deliberate observation of the forest and cabins, the whispers that circled us, and the metallic tang that lingered in the air. The camp waits, always patient, always deliberate, measuring those who enter. And sometimes it lets you leave, but only on its terms. Night had fully claimed the abandoned summer camp, and the forest around it seemed to press closer, as if the trees themselves were aware of our intrusion. The air had grown cold and thick, carrying a metallic tang that reminded us of something unseen, patient, and deliberate. Each step we took on the gravel and broken wooden planks echoed strangely, distorted by the silence that hung over the camp like a heavy curtain. We moved cautiously toward the cabins nearest the lake. The water was black and still, reflecting the moon and the twisted shadows of the surrounding trees. A rusted rowboat lay half submerged at the shore, its peeling paint flaking into the stagnant water. Every rustle, every crack of a branch felt orchestrated, as if the forest and camp itself were alive, watching our every move. "Did anyone else feel that?" whispered one of my friends, voice trembling. I nodded, swallowing hard. The feeling was impossible to describe, the sense of being observed, measured, and judged. Shadows seemed to move at the edge of our flashlights, bending and twisting in ways that defied logic. The elongated figures from the previous night appeared intermittently, gliding silently between the cabins and trees, patient, deliberate, almost ritualistic in their movements. We approached the main activity hall again, its doors swinging loosely on rusted hinges. Inside, the air was heavier, smelling of decay, dust, and the lingering metallic tang. Broken tables and chairs were scattered across the floor. Sunlight had no claim here, only darkness ruled. Shadows pooled in the corners, stretching and twisting, and for a fleeting moment one of the figures appeared, thin and elongated, bending unnaturally, as if the laws of physics did not apply to it. The whispers began again, low, guttural, distorted, but this time closer. "Leave! Leave!" they repeated, though the sound seemed to move with us, echoing from different directions at once. The rustling of the trees and the snapping of branches intertwined with the whispers, creating a rhythm meant to disorient, to unnerve, to push us toward panic. My friends clutched each other, trembling, unable to speak except for short gasps of breath. We moved slowly, deliberately, toward the path that led out of the camp. Every exit seemed farther, more convoluted than before. The cabins, trees, and shadows had shifted in ways that made navigation confusing. The elongated figures circled us intermittently, bending impossibly, gliding silently, testing our fear, measuring our responses, and asserting control over our actions. Around midnight, we reached the lake's edge again. The still water reflected the moon, but I could see something beneath the surface, a dark, undulating shape that shifted unnaturally. It moved in ways no animal could, gliding beneath the water like it had intelligence, awareness. The rustling of the forest amplified, echoing unnaturally. The metallic tang became stronger, curling into our lungs, making every breath a reminder of the field, or, in this case, the camp, being fully aware of our presence. We decided to explore the rowboat, hoping it might provide some sense of perspective, or an escape route. The boat groaned as we stepped inside, water sloshing up from the bottom, icy against our shoes. Shadows from the trees and cabins danced across the surface of the lake, bending in impossible ways, reflecting forms that seemed elongated, unnatural, deliberate. My flashlight flickered, and for a moment I could swear a figure rose from the water, bending impossibly before vanishing back beneath the surface.
One of my friends whispered, "We shouldn't be here. We need to leave now."
I nodded silently, but the path back was no longer simple. The forest and camp seemed to warp around us, the shadows shifting as if the space itself had awareness. Each step forward was met with uncertainty. Every rustle, every whisper, every distant groan was measured, intentional, designed to unnerve us. The figures from earlier glided between the trees, bending unnaturally, circling us in a deliberate, ritualistic pattern. Time lost all meaning. Minutes stretched into hours. Every sound, every shadow, every whispered phrase seemed orchestrated, deliberate, a test of endurance and courage. My friends whispered reassurances to each other, but their voices sounded hollow, swallowed by the oppressive silence and the weight of the camp's awareness. By 1:30 a.m. the figures drew closer. They moved with synchronized precision, weaving between the trees and cabins, bending impossibly, gliding silently, observing without approach. Their shadows twisted across the ground in grotesque patterns, stretching impossibly before melting back into darkness. The metallic tang in the air thickened, curling around our limbs, our lungs, and our hair, an invisible but undeniable pressure. Suddenly, from deep within the forest, a low groan echoed, unnervingly close. The shadows of the trees bent and swayed as if amplifying the sound. The elongated figures paused, almost bowing to the source, and then resumed their deliberate movements, circling, observing, patient. The whispers grew louder, insistent, moving with the rhythm of the groan, repeating, "Leave, leave, leave." Their voices seemed to penetrate the very air, pressing against our minds. We tried to move toward the path again, but the cabins and trees had shifted, subtly, impossibly, warping the space around us. Every step felt longer, heavier, as though the camp itself resisted our departure. The figures continued their methodical circling, bending, gliding in patterns we could not comprehend. Every rustle, every snap, every whispered phrase reminded us of our intrusion, our fear, and our vulnerability. By 3 a.m. exhaustion threatened to overtake us, but sleep was impossible. The camp's awareness, the patient observation of the figures, and the persistent metallic tang kept us alert, tense, and terrified. Each moment was drawn out, deliberate, a record of our presence, our fear, and our hesitation. At 4 a.m., the figures finally retreated into the shadows. Slowly, deliberately, they withdrew, leaving us in silence but not safety. The metallic tang lingered faintly, a reminder that we had been observed, measured, and allowed to leave, but only on the camp's terms. The whispers faded, but the pressure remained, pressing on our minds, bodies, and hearts. Dawn finally arrived. Weak, pale light filtered through the trees, illuminating the decaying cabins and lake. The camp seemed inert, harmless, yet the memory of the night remained vivid. The figures, the whispers, the metallic tang, they had not disappeared. The camp had allowed us to leave, but it had recorded everything, our fear, our reactions, our presence. Even now I can recall every detail with painful clarity. The elongated figures gliding between trees and cabins, bending impossibly, patient and deliberate. The whispers circling in the darkness. The metallic tang curling in the air, thick and choking. The sense that the camp, the forest, the abandoned structures, they were all aware, watching and waiting. Camping, exploring, curiosity, they all carry risks we cannot measure. The abandoned summer camp had rules. It observed, it measured, it waited. And sometimes it allows intruders to leave, but only on its terms. Night fell again over the abandoned summer camp, darker and colder than the previous nights. The forest pressed in closer, suffocating as though it had grown impatient with our presence. Shadows stretched unnaturally across the clearing, moving subtly even when no wind disturbed the air. Every sound, the creak of a broken swing, the rustle of leaves, the faint splash of water at the lake, carried intent, deliberate, calculated to unsettle us. The cabins, once inanimate structures, seemed to loom toward us, tilting slightly, shadows pooling in their corners like sentinels. Our flashlights cut thin, trembling beams through the darkness, revealing glimpses of movement that vanished as soon as we focused. The elongated figures from the previous nights appeared intermittently, gliding between the trees, bending impossibly, moving in a silent, patient rhythm that defied comprehension. "Do you see that?" one friend whispered, voice shaking. I nodded. The figures did not approach, yet their awareness of us was undeniable. Every step we took, every breath, every shiver was observed. The camp itself seemed alive, waiting, deliberate, a predator, measuring fear, patience, and endurance. The metallic tang in the air had returned, curling in our lungs, thickening with every inhale, reminding us that something unseen was monitoring us. We approached the main lodge again, its rusted doors swung loosely, the hinges groaning in protest. Inside, the smell of decay was stronger than before, mingling with the metallic scent that seemed almost sentient. Broken furniture lay scattered, old photographs yellowed with time and dust strewn across the floor. Shadows pooled in corners, stretching unnaturally, bending toward us and then recoiling when we turned our gaze. The whispers began again, low, guttural, almost human, yet distorted. "Leave, leave, leave." They circled the room, bouncing off the walls, echoing in patterns that made our heads spin. My friends clutched each other, trembling, silent except for gasps and shallow breaths. The camp seemed to pulse with awareness, moving subtly in response to our fear. As we explored further, we noticed the elongated figures becoming more confident. They glided closer, bending impossibly, weaving between trees and cabins in synchronized patterns. Shadows twisted along the walls and ground, forming shapes that defied logic, limbs extending too far, torsos bending where there should be none. Every movement was deliberate, patient, and full of intent. Around midnight we reached the old Arts and Crafts Hall. Its doors hung on rusted hinges, and inside the remnants of old projects were frozen in dust. Torn paper, dried paint, broken clay sculptures, all silent witnesses to what had occurred here. Shadows pooled unnaturally, and for a fleeting moment we saw figures, tall, thin, bending impossibly, standing among the tables, observing, patient, and deliberate. A sudden gust of wind, or something resembling wind, swept through the hall. The broken windows rattled, and the metallic tang thickened in our noses and lungs. My friends whispered frantically, urging us to leave, but the exits now seemed farther, twisted, warped. The camp itself had shifted subtly reshaping the space around us. Every step forward required careful attention, every misstep seemed noticed. We moved cautiously toward the lake, hoping to regain orientation. The water was black still, reflecting the moon and twisted shadows. A rowboat floated eerily near the shore, swaying without wind. Shadows of trees and cabins reached toward it, bending impossibly, intertwining with the elongated figures that glided silently along the shore. The whispers followed, low and insistent, urging us to leave, repeating in rhythm, "Leave, leave, leave."
Hours stretched into an unending night. Each snap of a branch, every rustle of leaves, every whisper echoed unnaturally, amplified by the patient awareness surrounding us. The figures circled relentlessly, bending, gliding, observing, testing our fear and endurance. Every sound was deliberate, each shadow measured, and the metallic tang persisted, thick and choking, a constant reminder of the unseen presence enveloping us.
Around 2:30 a.m. one figure glided closer than ever before. It hovered near the edge of the firelight, bending impossibly, almost human in silhouette, yet impossibly elongated. Its presence pressed against our minds, a patient, deliberate observation that left no room for comfort. My friends whispered short, frantic prayers. I could feel my heart pounding, throat tightening, but speaking aloud seemed unwise. The camp's awareness was everywhere, omnipresent and deliberate. The night pressed on. The figures moved rhythmically, synchronously, gliding between trees and cabins, bending in ways that made the world feel unstable. Shadows stretched across the clearing in grotesque shapes, twisting and morphing, yet disappearing when we attempted to focus. Every movement was orchestrated to maintain tension, to stretch fear into a physical presence pressing against our senses. By 3:15 a.m., the metallic tang in the air became almost unbearable. It curled into our lungs, tight and suffocating. The whispers grew louder, circling the clearing, bouncing unpredictably. Every rustle of leaves, every snap of a branch, every flicker of shadow seemed intentional, deliberate, a reminder that the camp had measured us, observed us, and was aware of every heartbeat and shiver. Around 4:00 a.m., the figures began to retreat slowly, deliberately, melting into the shadows of the trees and cabins. The whispers faded but did not disappear entirely. Silence returned, heavy, suffocating, pressing against our minds and hearts. The metallic tang lingered faintly, a reminder of what had been, of what had watched us, and of what would wait for the next intruders. As dawn broke, pale light filtered through the trees, illuminating the twisted cabins and stagnant lake. Everything appeared inert, harmless, but the memory of night was vivid, etched into our minds. The camp had allowed us to leave, but only after marking our fear, our presence, and our awareness. The forest, the cabins, the lake, all watched, all recorded, all waited. Even months later, the memory remains. The elongated figures gliding between trees and cabins, bending impossibly, patient and deliberate. The whispers circling, urging leave. The metallic tang curling in the air, thick and suffocating. The realization that the abandoned summer camp is alive in its own way, aware, deliberate, patient, and it measures every intrusion. Camping, exploring, curiosity, they carry risks that cannot be measured. The abandoned camp had rules, and we had broken them. It had observed, measured, and allowed us to leave, but only on its terms. The figures, the whispers, the metallic tang, the warped shadows, they remain, waiting for the next intruders, as patient and deliberate as ever. The final night at the abandoned summer camp was the worst. Darkness pressed down like a living weight, thick and suffocating. The forest surrounding the camp had grown even more oppressive, trees looming closer, their shadows reaching for us, twisting unnaturally. Every sound, the creak of rusted swings, the crackle of leaves, the distant splash of water, felt orchestrated, deliberate, designed to unsettle and terrify. The cabins, skeletal remnants of what had once been cheerful summer spaces, seemed to lean toward us, shadows pooling in corners as if sentinels waited inside. Our flashlights flickered, cutting thin, quivering beams through the darkness. The elongated figures from previous nights appeared intermittently, gliding silently, bending impossibly, observing with patient, deliberate precision. "Stay close," I whispered, trying to sound calm. My friends nodded, eyes wide, bodies tense. The metallic tang in the air had thickened, curling in our lungs, making each breath feel sharp and intrusive. Shadows moved independently of our lights, twisting and stretching along cabin walls, across the forest floor, and along the water. Each movement was deliberate, almost ritualistic, a reminder that the camp and its unseen inhabitants were aware of every heartbeat, every tremor, every whispered word. We moved cautiously toward the main lodge. Its doors groaned on rusted hinges, the air inside thick with decay, and the metallic scent that seemed to pulse with awareness. Broken tables and chairs littered the floor, remnants of past activities frozen in dust. The shadows pooled in corners, stretching into grotesque shapes that vanished when we tried to focus. The whispers began again, low, guttural, circling the space. "Leave. Leave. Leave." They echoed off the walls and trees, moving unpredictably, penetrating the mind and pressing against sanity. My friends clutched each other, silent, except for shallow, trembling breaths. The camp seemed alive, watching, testing our endurance and fear. Around midnight, the figures approached more closely than ever before. They hovered at the edge of our firelight, bending unnaturally, gliding silently, observing. Their presence pressed against our minds, an almost tactile awareness, a patient, deliberate judgment of our intrusion. Every instinct screamed to run, but the paths had shifted, the cabins seemed to warp, and the forest pressed in. We were trapped not physically but mentally, measured and contained by the camp's awareness. We tried to navigate back to the lake, hoping for familiarity, a sense of direction. The water reflected the moon, black and still, twisted by shadows that moved independently, bending impossibly. The rowboat bobbed slightly, but no wind touched it. Shadows from the trees and cabins extended unnaturally, twisting together with the figures, moving as one, deliberate and patient. The whispers grew louder, overlapping in distorted patterns, urging us to leave while testing our courage. Hours dragged on, Every sound was amplified, every shadow deliberate. The figures circled with methodical precision, bending, gliding, observing. The metallic tang in the air thickened to almost suffocating levels, curling around our lungs, binding us to the awareness that surrounded us. Each moment felt like hours, stretching fear into a tangible, oppressive presence. By 2:45 a.m., one figure approached close enough that I could see its grotesque silhouette, elongated, bending impossibly, gliding with an unnatural smoothness. Its presence was overwhelming, pressing against the senses, the mind, the heart. My friends whispered fragmented prayers. I held my flashlight steady, careful not to provoke it. The camp itself seemed to pulse with anticipation, deliberate, patient, aware of every micro-reaction we displayed. Suddenly, from deep within the forest, a low groan echoed. Not human, not animal. It reverberated in a way that made the ground and air feel alive. The figures paused, bending slightly, acknowledging the source, then resumed their deliberate circling. Shadows shifted with every echo of the groan, stretching, twisting, intertwining with the elongated forms. The metallic tang thickened, nearly unbearable, reminding us of the observation, the judgment, the awareness that suffused the camp. Around 3:30 a.m., exhaustion threatened to claim us. Our bodies screamed for rest, but sleep was impossible. The camp's presence pressed against us, patient, deliberate, omnipresent. Each rustle, every snap of a branch, every whisper, and every distorted shadow reminded us we were intruders, measured, observed, judged. The figures' movements became almost hypnotic, their rhythmic gliding and bending pulling our focus and sanity toward the edge. By 4:15 a.m., the figures finally retreated, slowly melting into the shadows of the forest and cabins. The whispers faded but did not disappear entirely. Silence returned, heavy, oppressive, suffocating, yet the metallic tang lingered faintly in the air, a reminder that the camp had marked us, measured us, and had allowed us to leave, but only on its terms. As dawn broke, pale light illuminated the twisted cabins, the stagnant lake, and the surrounding forest. Everything appeared inert, harmless. Yet the memory of night remained vivid. The figures, the whispers, the metallic tang, they had not vanished. The camp had recorded our presence, our fear, our reactions. Its awareness was patient, deliberate, unyielding, and eternal. Even now, months later, I can recall every detail. The elongated figures gliding between trees and cabins, bending impossibly, patient and deliberate. The whispers circling, urging us to leave. The metallic tang curling in the air, thick and suffocating. The sense that the abandoned summer camp is alive, aware, and deliberate in its observation. Camping, curiosity, exploration, these carry risks we cannot measure. The abandoned summer camp has rules, and we had broken them. It observed, recorded, and allowed us to leave, but only on its terms. The elongated figures, the whispers, the twisted shadows, the metallic tang, they remain, waiting for the next intruders. Patient, deliberate, eternal. You made it through the night, or at least through these stories. The abandoned cabins, the twisted forest, the shadows that bent and glided, they are not just stories. They are memories, experiences, and warnings. Somewhere in the dark, the camp waits, patient, deliberate, watching for the next curious soul who dares to step off the path. Think back to the figures that glided between trees, the whispers that circled you, the metallic tang that clung to the air. Can you feel it? The weight of the camp's awareness? That same awareness lingers in the woods outside your window tonight, and perhaps in the dark corners of your own home. If you survived these stories, take a moment and reflect. What would you do if you found yourself alone, somewhere abandoned, where every shadow had a will of its own? How far would you walk before the silence became unbearable? We'd love to know. Where are you listening from tonight? Type it in the comments below. And if you've ever had an experience like any of these, strange noises in the woods, a feeling of being watched, shadows moving on their own, share it. Some of your stories might even appear in future videos. Remember, curiosity can be dangerous. Some places and some moments are best left unexplored. Thank you for listening. Thank you for staying with us in the dark. Until next time, keep your flashlight close, your mind alert, and never forget, some shadows are alive. Welcome back to Minute 60, where we share stories that are real, stories that linger long after the lights go out. And remember, you never know what might be watching.